My son, he's getting married to his lifelong sweetheart. I mean, they've known each other since they were little. I'm talking 9 years old, and they have been inseparable since. However, there's a part I should add. She's absolutely psychotic, and she does something in this story that'll have you twisting and turning, maybe even in your nightmares. Let me share with you exactly what she did to my son. I had to throw out my psychotic daughter-in-law who had mentally tortured my son. Everyone thinks, including my son, that I'm an insecure, paranoid mother who cannot give space and freedom to her son to make his own decisions. And this is all just because I resent my daughter-in-law, right? But I don't resent her. I just had some reservations about her. And I feel so stuck about whether I should act upon my past insecurities or give him space. I watch as my son, who has become oblivious to the psychotic woman he loves, end up ruining his life as a result of her. How can I just stay silent and witness all this happening? Hi, my name's Martha. I'm 55 and female, and I'm the mother of Jacob, who's 28, whom I brought up single-handedly. Though the life of a single parent is not easy, I love it. And the girl who entered Jacob's and my life is Jessica, his wife, his childhood friend, or to be precise, his childhood love. All this drama began with a doorbell ring. As I expected Jacob to be home, hurriedly I went to fetch the door. My heartbeat stopped when I saw those pair of eyes, violet doe eyes, staring back at me. Jacob introduced her to me, and I did not need an introduction. I remember her perfectly as if she had met me yesterday. Shaken back to the present, today that same Jessica, now 27 years of age, standing around 5'4", returned my smiles as she entered shyly. Jacob freshens up and helps me set the table. I tried to keep myself busy to avoid further interaction with her. Jessica was warm and friendly with me, and I wondered if she had changed in all those years. As soon as she entered, she looked around and complimented the place, but I sensed the sarcasm dripping from her voice. She commented on my food being too oily, described what kind of taste she prefers, and suggested we try that out. And I noted one more reason not to like her. Jacob tries to tell her about his favorite childhood comfort food, but she interrupts him, saying it's really unhealthy, and he should instead try her favorite comfort meal. Jacob was a bit taken aback, but just agreed and nodded. She swooned over Jacob after we finished our dinner. We finished our dinner, and she asked Jacob to drop her home, but I said it was not too late. Jacob would call her a taxi. She grimaced, but nodded. Jacob walks her out and catches a cab for her. He lifts his arm to give her a goodbye hug, but she stepped back and just sat down in the car. But he didn't let her close the gate. They were talking about something later when she went to the door and shut, and Jacob turned around smiling. I asked why did she get upset. He laughed and said she was just teasing, nothing serious, and I was remembering everything that happened 20 years ago. Sitting on my bed, I thought of each memory of that moment that I always missed but kept avoiding, because Jessica's mom was the only friend for whom I still grieved at her loss. So let me tell you about 20 years ago and what happened. It was a summer afternoon when I saw a truck unloading luggage. I concluded that somebody was moving into our neighborhood. Then a car stopped beside the truck, and a little girl, barely 9 years of age, with blonde curls and violet doe eyes, jumped out of the vehicle with a cotton doll in her hand. That's when I met Jessica. She saw me, I smiled, but she didn't return it and went inside the house. After that, a lady stomped her foot out of the car and rushed inside by slamming the door behind her. There was also a guy who was driving but could not look at his face. It seemed like a couple picked a fight moments ago. I miss Thomas, my late husband, who passed away 3 years ago when Jacob was 11. I wished luck to the couple because these moments are precious and one never knows when they will last. Later in the evening, I heard my doorbell ring. and I found Jessica's mother standing with a casserole in her hand. She said that she had just moved in there and had a bit of pudding that she wanted to share with us. I welcomed her inside for a cup of tea, and she told me about herself. She moved in from Seattle, and her husband has been transferred. He was a banker, and they have a daughter, Jessica. She is 10 years of age, and they will get her admitted to school within a few days. I also told her about myself, and she sympathized for my husband's death. She was so warm and polite that no one could imagine that a few moments ago she was the same person who banged on the car door so aggressively. I mean, it's pretty hard to judge people for who you really are and what they're going through, and she got up, offered to come over to catch up, and asked to bring Jacob along with me. My casual interactions with her became so frequent that we did not realize we had become friends. We started going to kiddie parties together, shopping for groceries, etc. Then, after a few days, I was busy at the garage while Jacob was playing along with the other boys in the street, and the ball fell at Jessica's house. Well, all the guys pushed Jacob to get to it, and reluctantly he went inside and found Jessica. He asked her for the ball, and shyly and nervously she returned it. He smiled and thanked her. That was the first interaction they had with each other, and Jessica looked a little surprised after talking to him. The next afternoon, when I picked up Jacob from his school bus, I saw Jessica also getting down. I greeted her, and she just looked at me. "Bad manners, Jessica," I heard from her mother standing behind me. She instructed her to return the greetings because it's impolite to not respond. We walked down the streets, and Jacob accompanied her all the way home and waved to her goodbye. To my surprise, she turned and waved back, smiling. Later that afternoon, I found Jacob holding Jessica's hands and standing at the door. I invited them both and offered them a couple muffins and lemonade. Due to her friendship with Jacob, she also started opening up to me. But things did not remain good for very long. Some disturbing noises became more frequent than I used to hear from her house, like random voices of things breaking, or heavy objects hitting the floor, and voices of someone yelling were also to be heard. Jessica's mom started turning silent and distracted, and my interaction with her started to reduce. She looked more anxious and reserved, and along with that, some things began to change about her during the shirt's duration. Like her always leaving before sunset and always wearing a full-sleeved dress and the scorching summer heat. She started wearing more makeup, even though some of the marks of fingerprints were visible on her wrist. I tried to ask her, but she laughed it off with some excuse, and yes, I was worried about her, so I tried harder to ask her, and she confessed that her husband had some anger issues and had started drinking again. I volunteered to help and also suggested filing a complaint, but then she was hopeful, as he used to be so loving in the past, and maybe he would just change this time, maybe. Well, she asked for some time, and I gave it to her, thinking she would come to me on her own. After all, I always reminded her of my support, kept all my communications open to her, and never made her feel alone. But waiting for her to come to me for help might be the biggest mistake ever, because one night I woke up because of the loud sound of an ambulance. A chill ran down my spine. I saw a corpse being carried in the ambulance, and my feet froze ice cold. I still could not shake off that dreadful view of Jessica's mother's lifeless body being carried away. The guilt ate me inside out, and later it was proven that she committed, harm to herself because she found her husband cheating on her, which led her to give up on all things and ties, including her marriage, family, and her own life. I felt sorry for Jessica's loss. She was really close to her mom, and she always felt loved by her. It was evident through her reactions, as she always chose to listen to her and did everything only when she nodded at her. I hardly saw her dad around or home because, his presence was pretty evident through the noise of things being thrown and hit, and that's the only way I knew he was there. Updates. After a year. Guys, I can safely conclude that the impact of her parents' constant aggression has been on Jessica's mind at such a tender age. She actually turned out to be more reserved than the kids her age. She hardly speaks, responds or reacts to anything, and I never saw her smile. She stayed alone without any friends, so I tried several times to interact with her by initiating the conversation, offering her candy, but she ignores me like I simply do not exist. With Jessica's recent behavior, it was quite evident that the loss of her mother has taken a severe toll on her mental and emotional health. She turned out to be a bit more aggressive with each passing year, and credit also goes to her father's parenting, who was nonchalant and absolutely aggressive towards her. She often directs her anger at her father and talks back to him. Jessica was approaching her teenage years, yet her rebellious actions and degree of violence were not less than those of a 16-year-old teenager. Whenever her father becomes aggressive in his parenting, she snaps back by saying she's not a mom and never wants to be like her. When everything was failing and falling apart in Jessica's life, only one thing bloomed, and it was her friendship with Jacob. On one usual day, the doorbell rang, and I found Jacob, who was 11 years old at the time, standing right there alone with Jessica. Holding her hand? I was surprised to see Jessica smile because this was the first time I'd seen her smile in a long time. She was smiling, not by looking at me, but only at Jacob. He brought her inside and jumped on his toes, telling me that he was going to show her his new car that I gifted him yesterday, and he pulled her into his room. Jacob and Jessica became friends, or rather, should I say, best friends. Almost in an instant, Jacob had other guy friends around, but since he met her, he has only been found talking to her, showing her things, and even sharing ice cream at school lunch with her. They have almost been always inseparable ever since. But Jacob's interaction with his other friends was reduced. The school's principal called me one day concerned about Jacobs because, well, he frequently hangs out with Jessica a lot, which is a total troublemaker and a walking disaster. Last week she fought with a group of boys, and now she's talked back to her teacher and humiliated him. They're looking forward to rusticating her because she's not responding to their counseling sessions. They warned me to not let Jacob spoil being in her company. I thought of talking to her father once to inform him about the issues with Jessica and convince him to be sensitive while dealing with her. When I visited Jessica's house, Jessica turned gloomier and thinner. Her father yelled at her to serve the guests, example me, but mistakenly she dropped something on the floor, then shattered it into pieces. Her dad raised his hand to hit her. Angry, Jessica started throwing things around to defend herself, and the glass object she threw was close enough to hit my head. But I was lucky she missed. Well, she ran to her room, banging the door shut behind her, and her father yelled at her for her disobedience and reckless behavior. He swore to send her to her hostel for the misbehavior and craziness he's been dealing with, and he apologized to me on her behalf. Witnessing her actions was nothing as compared to the look in his eyes, reflecting her madness. Her rage in her eyes was so intense that it gave me absolute goosebumps. Before leaving, I turned around and something just came to my mind that I could not resist. So, I finally asked him about what exactly happened with her mother. He was not prepared for this sudden question, so he looked quite uncomfortable with it, and he said he was too drunk to think straight. He didn't realize that she thought that gave her such a terrible idea of taking her own life, and let me deal with her reckless daughter. I got angry at those words, so I asked about rumors that they were cheating on her. Annoyed, he said that it was just a one-time fling, and I should stay out of his business, while saying that he shut the door on my face. Single-handedly parenting kids is very tough. Missing Thomas, it also reminds me of how Jessica's father has been parenting her all alone since her mother died, Because at the time when I punished Jacob to keep him away from her, I felt so hopeless. And really helpless as well. After a few days, as expected, Jessica was being rusticated from school, and her father had moved her to a hostel in another state, where he got transferred. Though I was relieved that she left, I felt horrible for both Jacob and Jessica. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So that was somewhat of a backstory. Now we're going to jump back to the present where the story started now that we know the history of Jacob and Jessica. Update number 2, back to the present. I saw the calendar. It is 2023 now, and all that happened 20 years ago. It's still fresh as today in my mind. It was already late, so I pulled my covers up and just lulled myself into sleep. The next morning, I woke up late into the morning and the hall was empty, and I found my breakfast on the table with a note saying that he was going to bring her tonight, so he requested that I make a turkey for dinner because he planned a surprise. How can I not expect that it won't be Jessica? All my fears are coming alive. So, when she came up this time, I noticed she was happier than yesterday. Both their body language was more relaxed and open than being shy and reserved the last time. This time, she was more outspoken about everything, and she dolled up and dressed up for today, though I don't know what the occasion is. I'm sure it'll be the turning point in our lives, and I cannot change that. I had to go with the flow for the time being, and Jacob proposed to her and put the ring on her finger. She could not control her tears, and seeing them overwhelmed me, and I hoped that at least their love for each other would be enough to deal with all the obstacles in life. Excitedly, they both started discussing their marriage and whatever upcoming arrangements needed to be finalized. Jacob expressed his wish to have a small budget wedding, but Jessica interrupted by saying that she wants a luxurious wedding with limited people. Example, a wedding only with the close ones. Jacob's bride face shrunk, and in her justification she said that it is one thing and marrying Jacob and making him a part of her life was the most special thing ever to happen to her, so she wants the moment to be absolutely perfect. To her point of view, intimate and small weddings are better, as they do have a bit more privacy, right? Jacob and I did seem to agree with her on that one. After she left, Jacob helped me do the dishes, and I tried my best to just, get my luck by conveying to him that it's been so long since he met her after so many years, and it'll be better for both of them to get to know each other first before just jumping into a lifelong commitment after marrying. I tried to hint that there have been so many things that turned out to be problematic last time. He refused, saying that he knew her already and that things had changed a lot since then. Well, people do change with time, so at least she should be given a chance. He told me that he's happy and is ready to take a risk by choosing to spend the rest of his life with her. And he also said that I would also end up liking Jessica. Hearing such a response, I realized that it was highly unlikely that he would change his mind, so I chose not to say anything. But I still think the anger issues with Jessica were not dealt with quite right, so they might be lurking in her somewhere. Update number 1 after the present time. Being a mother, I had my own expectations of an ideal marriage for my only son. But when we reached the venue to see the wedding preparations, I saw that whatever details we had discussed with Jessica, everything changed. And all the ideas about the arrangements, venue, decor, and shortlisting of the menu were according to her likings and dislikings. I tried to question Jacob about this, and Jessica said on his behalf that the wedding should be according to the bride's wishes. After all, it was her special day. When I questioned her about the expenses that were mostly done by us, she said that it was Jacob's wedding as well, and it won't matter after all, we are already a family. And she looked at him. Well, asking, right, Jacob? Jacob nodded and agreed, and Jessica said Jacob is already loving it. I was disappointed, but I knew it was too late to argue. Jessica prefixed everything. She was in charge of making all the arrangements, scheduling appointments, shopping, running errands, you name it. So, the wedding bells rang, and it was time for the ceremony when the bride and groom took the vows for each other. There she did something really strange. She sought allegiance from Jacob as one of the wedding vows and took the promise of never letting any third person come in between them. This moved Jacob, who happily agreed. I failed to foresee the repercussions that the vow could hold for us in the future, and she made the wedding entirely about her and her beloved Jacob. No other person existed for her or mattered to her, and poor Jacob did not even realize that. By the end of the wedding, I could perceive a sense of achievement on her face as she finally got what she wanted, i.e., Jacob. The next day I saw Jacob and Jessica arguing over something already, so I tried to ask them. He informed me that since the wedding was quite expensive for him, he wants to save for a few months before applying for a loan to buy a home. Till then, he expressed his desire to stay here at my home, and I never had any issues with that. But the only person who had them was Jessica. You see, Jessica says that she needs her own space and everything according to her taste, and the house is too small to accommodate her needs. Jacob tried to convince Jessica by promising her he would get her dream home just the way she wanted it, and he begged for her support to make that come true. Soon, reluctantly, she agreed. Update number 2 after a week. Jessica made breakfast for Jacob and denied him butter for his toast, saying he's already out of shape and needs to cut calories to be a bit healthier. It doesn't end there. She even objected to the shirt he was wearing, saying it did not match the tone of his skin, so he could not leave without changing it. I interfered, saying that he was getting late. Let him go. He thanked me for saving him and left in a hurry. That evening, when Jacob was about to come home, I saw the kitchen empty and Jessica was on her phone talking to a broker. As she wanted to leave this place forever, I reminded her that it was time for dinner, but she just looked at me and continued with her phone call. I always hated her reactions, but I did not want to create drama since she would move to her place, hopefully soon. Jacob was about to come in half an hour, and not a single thing was cooked. Then I saw his text, saying he would be late due to a meeting, and I felt relieved, thinking I finally had enough time to cook a meal since I could not rely on Jessica any longer. I chopped the veggies, boiled the beans. Meanwhile, Jessica came up, asking about Jacob. I asked, did she not check her phone? Meanwhile, I doubted if she expected him sooner or why she didn't cook anything, and I told her to help me out, and she reluctantly agreed and took forever to peel the potatoes. Running out of time, I told her just do the dishes, and she broke my crockery. I was so annoyed that I started yelling at her. She glared at me angry, and before she could say anything, Jacob came over asking what was wrong. He fetched a glass of water for me, while she took a handful of water from the sink and dabbed some droplets right there on her face, pretending to cry. Jacob instantly consoled her and started taking her side. I tried to explain, but he did not want to listen and took her to the bedroom. Furious, I threw my apron away, shut off the induction, and left out of the cooking. I'm not going to cook him anything from now on. How about that? Update number 3. The next morning. Jacob wore what Jessica decided he needed to wear, and she made his favorite breakfast, asking him to take her shopping and have a date in the evening, and he promised to come home in time. In the evening, she dressed up and was ready and waiting for him, but he got there an hour late, and waiting for him made her absolutely furious. I stopped cooking for Jacob, and furious Jessica won't let him eat. He apologized to her, and she asked for expensive jewelry as an apology, and Jacob was not in a position to afford such expensive gifts. Enraged, She said he does not deserve her. She was doing so much to support him with his needs. She compromised her comfort by living and adjusting with his mother. She was cooking him meals, and he's a worthless husband who cannot buy her happiness. Sticking my ears to the door, I was actually listening to their entire drama while munching on my favorite caramel popcorn. Jessica was almost supervising everything about Jacob. Being a mother, I never did that. What to wear for what occasion, keeping track of his calorie intake, and things escalated so much that she did not even leave his personal life. One day at the breakfast table, Jacob told Jessica that he was going to be late since he was going to dinner with his clients. Jessica bombarded him with a million questions like, why could he not bring them to his place? What kind of people are they, and he could not bring them home? Jacob gets nervous, and to convince her, well, he gave her his entire contact list and informed her about all his friends that he had. I could predict she would not like the mention of his own life, where he has friends apart from her, as she considered herself his best friend and his only friend, and she's now his wife, and now that makes her absolutely jealous. That day, Jessica shows up at his workplace without informing him and introduces herself as Jacob's wife. Jacob, shocked and confused by seeing her, asked the reason for her visit. She didn't answer, but made an announcement about inviting everyone, including his clients, to our place for dinner. Everyone thought how lucky Jacob was to have such a supportive wife, and she said hi to each of his friends. I was the last person to hear about all this. At the office, she clung to Jacob the entire time and got to know each and every one of his friends. His colleagues he worked under, his juniors, peers, bosses, manager, clients, you name it. Jacob was furious. Well, with Jessica, for taking such decisions and initiating them without consulting him, but because everyone admired and respected her so much, his anger did start to subside. Jacob thanked her at last, but she was confused and started asking about a new employee who is his junior. You see, Jacob was confused and denied. Jessica said if he's not lying, then he is always having to tell her everything. Jacob, in a good mood, traded his command and with a smile. She also asked Jacob to share his mobile and bank account passwords, and he did that as well. Update number 3. Well, guys, things have been going downhill and getting worse ever since. Jacob spends almost half of his time trying to justify his actions, over-explaining everything about why he did whatever he did for the day. Constant begging for apologies by Jacob, and these continuously last warnings by Jessica, because if he fails to do so, she starts counting the favors she did him and plays out the victim card. Blaming him for being an incapable husband, and, if needed, compare him to her dad. Bringing out her past insecurities and rubbing them on Jacob's face led to Jacob always trying to compensate for his mistakes by trying to meet her unrealistic expectations and pampering her. She turned out to be an absolute priority in his life, and even after that, things got worse. From informing Jessica about his whereabouts to seeking permission from her through birthdays and anniversaries to buying anything for himself or for me. As she keeps track of everything that he's spending in the name of saving money for a said dream house. Jessica showers her love to him only because he agrees to something she wishes. At that moment, she agrees to compromise with her dream of owning her own house. How hypocritical of her. After 6 months, Jacob turned out to be frustrated that he kept lashing out at his coworkers and any phone calls that he had. He always looked irritated and absolutely tense, and he hardly hung out with anybody. Totally cut off from his social life due to his exhaustion from explaining, arguing, and convincing Jessica about every person he comes in contact with. He was afraid that if Jessica lost her temper, she would end up hurting them, and he doesn't wish the same harm upon anyone else, not even me. I try to keep my communications open with him, sometimes reaching out to him so that he can seek more consolation after sharing, but he refuses to take any chances. All he says is that Jessica was hurt by her dad's behavior, and his aggressive parenting which caused her anger issues. She was such a loving and caring person. She'll soon be the same innocent Jessica she was before her mother's death. He also reasoned that because her mother was submissive, she's kind of insecure and does not want to end up like her. Otherwise, history would go ahead and repeat itself. Listening to Jacob's words reminded me of Jessica's mother. Or to be precise, she became like Verdad and Jacob, who turned into Jessica's mother, who was abused the same way in false hopes that her husband would change. But it turned out that he never had even an ounce of regret that she left this world because of him. In fact, she was blamed for leaving Jessica with him to tolerate. My old fears started looming, because the last time I tried giving her space and time, she ended her life. I cannot afford to repeat the same with my baby boy, my son. So I tried to act sensible this time and suggested that he goes ahead and opts for marriage counseling so that he could communicate his issues and insecurities effectively. And an expert would deal better with Jessica and her anger issues sensitively. This was the best solution I could come up with. After all, she is my friend's daughter, even if she's not alive. Her daughter is still my responsibility, you know? Being part of our family, Jessica's issues should be ours as well, and we will try our best to deal with them together, but in a healthy manner, not agreeing with her unreasonable demands just like a parent does with their kid. In the evening, Jacob tries to talk to Jessica about what I discussed. I advised Jacob to bring this with her in my presence because she would pay no heed to him. But surprisingly, she agreed for the first time. Happily, Jacob took the appointment, and I doubted what she was thinking. I could not figure it out. On the day of the appointment, Jessica volunteered to drive, and she stopped the car midway and asked Jacob what went wrong and that he needed the interference of an outsider between them. Jacob thought of telling her that his mother is no outsider, but he doesn't want to get late for the appointment, so he just apologizes so they can reach on in time. Update number 4. This is the final post. I was glad that I took the decision because I could certainly witness a big positive change in Jacob's attitude. He got more confident, due to which he learned to speak for himself and refused to make unreasonable demands. He finally learned to say no. Redrawing his boundaries, he stopped getting affected by her tantrums and could recognize her acts. He came out of his shell, started to meet people, reconnect with his old buddies, and bring people home. But Jessica was getting worse day by day. She was trying to regain control of the situation by trying to dominate and get the upper hand. And in desperation, she started creating drama to provoke a few reactions. She accuses him of cheating on her and occasionally threatens to tell everyone about how her unloving husband has been harassing her mentally. But Jacob now stopped reacting. You see, he became thoughtful and tried to respond to the situation, and I was no longer worried for Jacob at this point. But my attention was drawn to Jessica at this time. So I went ahead and I talked to the counselor to give him a few regular updates. About their behavior, and just simply express my concern that Jessica's anger issues were not getting better. Looking at her current reports, he assured me that he would take Jessica for some sessions. Jessica was reluctant to attend the sessions and tried to skip it even, but we could only manage to send her to 2 sessions out of 4. One morning, Jacob went to visit the doctor with me to get her reports, and he told us that she's a psychopath and could get obsessed with anything to any extreme like she has been obsessed with him. He was shocked by the term psychopath, as it's not normal, but doctors said it's due to the lack of empathy. She has an antisocial personality, so there's no assurance that she won't harm someone in the long run, including Jacob. Also, such traits are usually inherited from parents, mainly the father. That evening, we picked up the fight over expenses, and Jacob even refused to be manipulated by her, ignored her, and got up from his table to go to the kitchen. He forgot his phone on the table, and I saw Jessica sneaking into his phone, and I interfered and saw what she was going to do and see exactly what she was up to. She grimaced and put his phone aside, saying it was none of my business, it was between her and Jacob. Well, I snapped back at her to watch her mouth. Jacob, as usual, had no idea, and I taunted her by replying to him. I was reminded her of her manners that she had forgotten after her mother passed, and I went out to take a walk. Jacob tells Jessica he should not behave like this with his mom. Jessica gets so mad at my statement and pulled an entire tablecloth and shattered everything onto the ground. Looking at this behavior, Jacob yelled at her for her actions. She said that he had broken his vows of back-to-backs by bringing his mother in between, and now a counselor? She didn't stop. Out of frustration, she picked things up and started throwing them at him. And when I heard the loud noises from my house, I ran back home and found one of the things had hit him on his head, and he was bleeding. Thankfully, it did not hit his eyes, but I got scared and I called emergency services in an instant. I had to send my daughter-in-law to an asylum when I found out what she did to my boy. While I was trying to control his bleeding, she wreaked havoc upon the entire house. She tore off all the covers and curtains and smashed the crockery and came over to punch him. But fortunately, cops and an ambulance showed up and they witnessed such violence. I talked to the cops and handed them her mental reports, and after that incident, Jacob divorced her. So the commenters are very, very split on this one, guys. A lot of people are taking OP's side, a lot of people are taking Jessica's side, and a lot of people are taking Jacob's side. They were saying Jessica has been through more trauma than most people will ever go through in their life, and this could have led her to the things that she did and all the mental health that she suffered. Jacob, people were on his side because they were saying, hey, Jacob, I understand that you love this girl and you love your mother, and this situation was so toxic for you. You want to be there for both of them, but it was so hard, and you know at the end of the story you had to divorce. And then finally people were on OP's side because a lot of them felt like she just wanted what was best for her son. So I want to know your thoughts, your opinions, whose side you would land on the most. Who's the a-hole of the story and who's not? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Guys, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day. So if you want daily videos, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. And just remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.